You've walked past Rosalind's diner every evening for the last 40 years. But tonight is the first time you actually stop to look at the man in the corner booth before you go in. Roscoe Hendricks. Same seat, same order, same silence. Nobody has sat across from him in longer than you can remember. And until tonight, you never thought to ask why. The bell above the door jingles as you step inside, and the smell of coffee and fried onions wraps around you like it always does. Marigold, the waitress who's worked here almost as long as Roscoe has been coming, gives you a small nod and slides a menu across the counter without being asked. You don't need it. You know this place better than your own kitchen at this point. But tonight your eyes drift back to that corner booth, where an old man in a faded flannel shirt sits with his hands folded around a coffee mug he hasn't touched in 10 minutes. You've seen him 1,000 times. Everyone in this town has. He shows up at 6, orders the meatloaf special, eats slow, and leaves by 7:30. Always alone, always polite, always invisible. If this story means something to you, if you've ever sat in a room full of people and still felt like nobody saw you, do me a favor and hit subscribe before we go any further. Because what happens to Roscoe tonight is the kind of thing this channel was built to tell. It's not really about a diner. It's about what happens when the world finally stops looking past someone. You slide into the booth across from your usual spot near the window, but something makes you glance at him again. Marigold catches you looking and leans in while she refills your water glass. 40 years, she says quietly. Every single night. Rain, snow, doesn't matter. He's here. 40 years, you repeat, like the number doesn't make sense in your mouth. Does he have family? Marigold's face does something complicated. Not quite sad, not quite guarded. Just tired in a way that tells you this isn't the first time someone's asked. Had a wife, Delphine. She passed a long while back. There's a son somewhere, I think. Out west. Doesn't come around. You look at Roscoe again. He's staring out the window at nothing. The way people do when they're not really seeing the street outside, but something much further away. Something from decades ago. His hands are large and rough, a working man's hands, folded neatly on the table like he's still waiting for someone who isn't coming. You don't know it yet, but tonight is going to be different. Tonight, something in this small town is about to shift, and you're going to be part of it. Roscoe Hendricks wasn't always the quiet man in the corner booth. Ask anyone over 60 in this town, and they'll tell you about the Hendricks hardware store that used to sit on Fenimore Street. The one Roscoe ran with his own 2 hands for 31 years. He knew every customer by name. He extended credit to families who couldn't pay right away and never once brought it up when they finally could. When the Kowalski barn burned down in '89, it was Roscoe who showed up before sunrise with lumber and nails, and didn't charge a cent. When old Mrs. Petrenko's roof caved in during the blizzard of '94, Roscoe had it patched within 2 days. Working in the cold himself, he built this town in the quiet ways that don't make the papers. And when his wife Delphine got sick, a long, slow illness that ate away at both her body and their savings, Roscoe sold the hardware store to pay for her care. He never complained, never asked for help. He simply did what needed doing, the way he'd always done. And when Delphine finally passed, something in him went quiet too. Their son, a man named Thaddeus, left for Denver not long after his mother's funeral. There was a falling out. Nobody in town knows exactly what it was about. Only that it happened, and that Thaddeus never came back. Not even for the holidays. Not even for his father's 70th birthday, which Roscoe spent alone at this very diner, eating his meatloaf special while the rest of the town celebrated Christmas with their families a few blocks away. You didn't know any of this until tonight. You'd seen Roscoe 1,000 times and never once wondered about the life behind those tired eyes. That's the thing about small towns. You think you know everyone, but really you only know the version of them that shows up in public. The surface, the routine. You never think to ask what's underneath. Marigold tells you all of this in pieces, refilling your coffee, glancing over at Roscoe every few minutes like she's checking that he's still there, still breathing, still holding on. He used to leave a little bigger tip on the anniversary of Delphine's passing, she says, every year, like he was trying to do something kind, because he couldn't do anything for her anymore. Been doing it for 11 years now. You feel something tighten in your chest. 11 years of quiet, private grief, played out in a diner booth where nobody thought to ask if he was okay. The tension in this story isn't loud. It's not a scream or a scandal. It's the slow, aching kind, the kind that happens when a good man becomes invisible simply because nobody stops long enough to see him, and it's about to get worse before it gets better. Because tonight, something happens that nearly breaks Roscoe Hendricks completely. A group of younger men come into the diner around 6:30, loud and laughing, clearly a few drinks in already from whatever they'd been doing before. They take the booth next to Roscoe's, and it doesn't take long before one of them, a broad-shouldered man with a smirk that makes your stomach turn, starts making comments loud enough for the whole diner to hear. "Look at this guy," he says, nodding toward Roscoe. "Same table every night. You think he's got somewhere better to be?" His friends laugh. Roscoe doesn't look up. He's had a lifetime of practice not looking up. "Bet his own family doesn't even want him around," the man continues, and something in his tone makes it clear he's not just being cruel for sport. He actually believes what he's saying carries some truth, the way people sometimes do when they've never had to sit with real loss. Marigold's jaw tightens. She starts toward their table. But before she can say anything, the man leans over toward Roscoe's booth. "Hey, old man, you always eat alone? That's kind of sad, isn't it?" The whole diner goes quiet. You feel your own heart pounding, that mix of anger and helplessness that comes when you watch someone get hurt and don't know if it's your place to step in. Roscoe finally looks up, and for a moment, you see something in his face, not anger, not even hurt exactly, just a bone-deep weariness, like a man who has absorbed this kind of casual cruelty so many times that he's simply learned to let it pass through him without protest. "Every night," Roscoe says quietly, his voice steady but soft. 40 years. The man laughs like this confirms something. 40 years. Man, that's rough. Nobody wants to sit with you, huh? And that's when Roscoe's composure cracks. Just slightly, just enough for you to see it. His hand resting on the table trembles once. He looks down at his coffee mug, and you watch him swallow whatever it is he wants to say, the same way he's swallowed it for years. He starts to gather his coat like he's going to leave early, for the first time in decades. Like this one moment of cruelty is finally enough to break a routine that outlasted grief, outlasted loneliness, outlasted everything. This is the moment. This is the breaking point. And you realize, sitting there in your own booth, that you have a choice to make. You don't remember deciding to stand up. Your body just moves before your mind fully catches up. Chair scraping against the floor, and you walk over to Roscoe's booth and slide in across from him, right where his wife used to sit, right where nobody has sat in longer than this town cares to admit. "Mind if I join you?" You ask, and your voice comes out steadier than you feel. Roscoe looks at you, startled, his eyes searching. Your face for some kind of trick or pity he's learned to brace against. "You don't have to do that," he says quietly. "I know I don't," you say. "I want to." The loud man at the next table scoffs, mutters something about people getting soft, but you don't even look at him. Your focus is entirely on Roscoe, on the way his shoulders slowly begin to lower, on the way his hands unclench just slightly around his coffee mug. Marigold appears at the table a moment later, and something has shifted in her face too, a kind of quiet determination. "Roscoe," she says, "did you know it's been 11 years today?" He looks up, surprised she remembers. "You kept track?" "Every year," she says. "I just never knew how to say anything." And then something remarkable happens. An older woman 2 booths down, a regular named Verity Ashcombe, who you recognize from church potlucks, gets up from her seat and walks over. "Roscoe Hendricks," she says. "You rebuilt my porch after the flood in '96 and wouldn't take a dime. I've been meaning to thank you. Properly for 30 years. She sits down at the edge of the booth, and Roscoe's eyes widen with something between disbelief and overwhelm. One by one it happens. A man named Cassius, who runs the auto shop down the road, remembers how Roscoe fixed his father's truck engine for free the week his dad lost his job. A young mother named Junia, who wasn't even born when Roscoe ran the hardware store, has heard the stories from her own mother and comes over just to shake his hand. Chairs get pulled from other tables. Voices rise, not with cruelty this time, but with warmth, with stories, with gratitude that's been sitting unspoken in this town for decades. The loud man and his friends, sensing the shift in the room, quietly pay their bill and leave without another word. Nobody even looks at them. All the attention in Rosalind's diner is now on the corner booth, where a man who ate alone for 40 years is surrounded, for the first time in longer than he can remember, by people who see him. Roscoe sits there overwhelmed, his eyes glistening in a way he's clearly fighting to control. "I don't understand," he says softly. Why now? Why tonight? And it's Marigold who answers him, her hand resting gently on his. Because somebody finally stopped to look, Roscoe. That's all it ever takes. The diner stays full and warm and loud with kindness for the next 2 hours, long past when Roscoe would normally have paid his check and walked home alone into the dark. People bring their own chairs over. Someone orders him a slice of pie he didn't ask for but doesn't refuse. The owner of the diner, a woman who inherited the place from her mother, comes out from the kitchen and quietly tells Roscoe that his meal, every meal, from now on, is on the house for as long as he wants it. But the story doesn't end there. Because word travels fast in a small town, and stories about kindness travel even faster. 3 days later, you find out that Thaddeus, Roscoe's estranged son, received a call from Verity Ashcombe, who tracked down his number through an old church directory and left him a message he almost didn't listen to. In it, she told him about that night at the diner. She told him about the 11 years of quiet grief, the 40 years of solitary meals, the town full of people who owed his father more than they ever repaid. She didn't guilt him. She simply told him the truth, plainly, the way people in small towns often do, and let him decide what to do with it. 2 weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, you're back at Rosalind's diner, and you watch the door open to reveal a man in his mid-40s, standing there with the same tired, searching eyes as his father, holding a duffel bag like he'd driven straight through without stopping. Roscoe looks up from his booth, and for a long moment neither of them says anything. Then Thaddeus walks over, sits down across from his father. In the seat you and half the town have taken turns filling over these past 2 weeks, and says the only thing that needed saying. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have come sooner. Roscoe's hands the same steady, weathered hands that fixed roofs and rebuilt porches and never asked for anything in return. Reach across the table and hold his sons for the first time in over a decade. Nobody in the diner says a word. Marigold quietly wipes her eyes with her apron. You feel your own throat tighten, watching 40 years of quiet loneliness finally, gently, come undone. Roscoe Hendricks still comes to the diner most nights now, but he's never alone anymore. Sometimes it's Thaddeus, who moved back to town not long after that Tuesday and took over managing what's left of the old hardware store's legacy, turning it into a community workshop where kids learn to build things with their hands, just like their grandfather once taught half this town. Sometimes it's Marigold, who takes her break at his table instead of the back room. Sometimes it's you, sliding into that corner booth just to hear one more story about the town Roscoe built with nothing but kindness and calloused hands. The booth by the window isn't a lonely place anymore. It's become something else entirely, a reminder, sitting right there in plain sight every single evening, of what happens when a community finally remembers to look up from their own lives long enough to see the people quietly holding it all together. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is simply notice the person everyone else has learned to overlook.